vast majority of those initiatives and activities are focused on the individual rather than the system.
We know they're in a state of constant stress because they're having to check their phones for emails before they go to bed, and if there's one from their boss, they feel they have to reply.
And on the other end, we see an increasing ability to monitor what everybody is doing because of technology.
I can condense that down to one word, the C word, control. For me, the thing that isn't addressed is that sort of theory X assumption that, you know, managers know best, people can't be trusted.
That's what all the yoga and the mindfulness, it's about you fixing you, rather than the system.
Anyone who comes with a single bullet type solution, I think, is kidding themselves and their audience that is going to work, right?
We're not going to do it by the 60 million quid to 60 billion pounds worth of sticking plasters. They've specifically designed their organisation not to feel like an organisation with tens of thousands of people.
Because it's just about bringing in practices and approaches that make it a more human place to work and give people more control over their environment.
It sounds to me that some of the solutions or avenues to explore for those organizations are significantly cheaper than some of the things that currently money is being spent on. Welcome everybody to this episode of Work Punks. This is an episode in which we will explore the subject of mental health at the occasion of Mental Health Awareness Week. It's an interesting question to what extent work is one of the leading reasons why mental health is deteriorating amongst populations around the globe, I think is fair to say. Who wants to kick off on this one?
I need to step in there because I think I came up with the idea that we might want to talk about this, and that was provoked by the latest in actually quite a long line of very well respected research that's emerging currently that is telling us that our efforts to improve our mental and emotional well-being of our employees, A, isn't working, and B, is costing more and more, and C, it isn't working because the vast majority of those initiatives and activities are focused on the individual rather than the system, which is something that we've been banging on about for a very, very long time. So apart from anything else, it will be interesting to see whether, you know, that I think it's currently at about 60 billion pounds a year in the UK, to see whether the way that money is being spent changes over time, and whether at long last we begin to turn the ship around and start seeing an improvement in the situation rather than the deterioration that we've seen from now on. So it's important that we, as this research directs us, begin to have a think at a more deeper level around the causes of this, as opposed to throwing solutions at the symptoms and seeing what sticks, because I think that's perhaps not worded particularly sensitively, but I think that's a fair summary of what's going on at the moment.
Yeah, it's interesting that all this money is being spent, and it's not having any impact, and yet they're spending more money at it. I mean, the reason for that, as I think you touched upon, Ben, is it's a systemic issue that the way that businesses operate today is creating the conditions that cause people to have worsening mental health. And yeah, I mentioned Stafford Beer's, POSIWID. The purpose of the system is what it does. So if you've got more sick people coming out of the system, that's what the system's set up to do. And until that simple truth is accepted and grasped, then all this money is going to be completely wasted. And I suppose it's a symptom of how far away companies are from actually getting to that point, that they keep putting more money in to fit. They keep putting more money into the solutions that aren't working without actually going to that deeper level of inquiry. Yeah, and I think, intuitively, work is much more demanding and demands much more time and effort and resource than it ever used to in the past. And people don't have the time or the energy to, relax or recharge. We know they're in a state of constant stress because they're having to check their phones for emails before they go to bed, and if there's one from their boss, they feel they have to reply straight away. That's very corrosive long term.
When you say that work nowadays is increasingly stressful, you immediately centered on that sort of that always on aspect of modern life, the mobile phones, the remote working, the laptops. Do you feel that that's the decisive factor between, let's say, the before 2000 and after 2000 state of the working population's mental health?
No, I'd add a few more things. I mean, I think that's a very obvious one, and there's a tendency, obviously, to blame everything on the internet and social media, but it certainly has an impact. And there has been, companies and managers have pushed over those boundaries quite deliberately. And we've seen it in France. I think they have legislation that you don't have to answer your emails over the weekend and things. And I would expect to see more of that in the future, to be honest. But it's also things like the fact that we have all these processes and procedures in place. Everyone's being performance measured all the time. You've got much worse than that. You've got full surveillance systems going on in some organisations. There's no let up. There's no slack in the system. There's nowhere to hide. And one of the things I talk about quite a lot is there's no time to build relationships. There's no time to go and learn stuff or just go and mess around in something to find out what happens, because you're part of the process. You've got your in tray and your out tray. They used to be physical things, but now they're electronic and they just come at you all the time. And if you're not processing stuff, someone's going to come along and tap you on the shoulder and tell you, you need to be getting your head down and plowing through this stuff. So that's much more stressful than when I started work. I mean, most of the time when I started work, my boss didn't know what I was doing, which is very good because I didn't really know what I was doing either.
But at least you had the freedom and the time to discover what it was that you could be doing.
Yeah, that's right. And I didn't have to run around doing things that I knew ultimately was pointless.
Yeah.
Which is another sort of premise is that because people know a lot of this work is just busy work and you are just churning the paperwork through, so to speak. There's no purpose or meaning to it, and that's also more stressful. I mean,
so there could be something going on that's almost causing an increasing crunch point, which is, on the one hand, people are probably better educated than ever. I mean, give or take. You certainly have more access to more information. So in that sense, there should be less of a need for people to be told what to do and be constantly monitored whether they're doing what they're being told to do. And on the other end, we see an increasing ability to monitor what everybody is doing because of technology, and therefore, while we do what we can, as in what I mean by that is what is possible to do, we tend to do. So with these increasing tools and techniques and bits of technology that allow you to monitor everything and see progress and whether you reach your KPIs and all the rest of it, you actually perhaps see increasing monitoring of people. So is that, go on, Ben.
Yeah, no, I think you've hit upon there kind of, for me, what is one of the biggest determinants of how we feel about work and our relationship with it and our employer. And it's never ever talked about in any of the, certainly what employers are being sold in the well-being space doesn't feature, and actually doesn't feature very much in even the research, but it underpins a lot of what features in the research. And I can condense that down to one word, the C word, control. And, you know, when we feel that we are being done to, and we are in this relentless kind of unending busyness that Colin describes, a lot of that, you know, if it has no meaning or has no impact that means anything to us, then I absolutely agree with Colin. Think that makes it worse. But that is so corrosive to our state mentally and emotionally. Whereas if we are trusted and challenged and supported and able to play to our strengths, we can flip that around like that. And, you know, happy consequence, better performance too. So I think what underpins and this whole situation, spending more and more money, things are getting worse and worse and worse. For me, the thing that isn't addressed is that sort of theory X assumption that, you know, managers know best, people can't be trusted. In order to put in a good day's work, people need to be controlled and coerced and incentivized, and carrots and sticks, and all that is right the way through the vast majority of organizations. Not described in those terms, but it's there at a level of tacit assumption. And I think until we address that, guess what, Posyword, will continue to get what we've always had. But I find it astounding that nobody's talking about it. Our fundamental beliefs and assumptions around work are still in Frederick Windlow Taylor's era, and the world of work is changed unrecognizably, and our expectations as employees has changed unrecognizably, and the other pressures on our life, internet, social media, etc., caring for people, increased exponentially. So yeah, I think it's a perfect storm, but spending 60 billion a year where we're currently spending it isn't going to fix it.
So there's 60 billion that you're talking about. Is this what companies spent on mental health, or is this what societies, what the UK?
No, this is businesses recognize this as growing need for it. Today, employee wellbeing accounts for more than 40 billion currently. This is 2020, set to rise to 60 billion by 2026, which is getting ever closer, and will exceed 75 billion by 2030. So we're doubling every 10 years.
And this is not even talking about the spend in, say, their health and care services.
No. The secondary and tertiary costs of this are, unknown and unknowable, but they will be an order of magnitude higher, I suspect.
Yeah, and the government, of course, is desperately trying to get on top of some of that. I think today in the news there's some fairly crude measure being sort of floated that would downgrade some of the mental health conditions, so that they're no longer, people suffering from those are no longer necessarily eligible for disability benefits, because again the costs there are increasing quite dramatically.
That's an example, and you know, this is another thing that is riddled through this topic is this victim blaming that we've seen, you know, by people in power, be that political or economic power, that it's not their fault, it's your fault. You know, you are somehow failing, and we had obviously, you know, as burnout became more and more of a thing, it was like, well, people need to be more resilient, you know, because they're just too flaky, and we see it now, you know, with mental health. It's, you know, that's what all the yoga and the mindfulness, it's about you fixing you, rather than the system. I mean, you know, if we throw something onto a fire, you know, then we don't criticize it for not being inflammable enough. You know, we've thrown it on fire. It's supposed to burn. That's the point. And if we don't want it to burn, we don't throw it on fire. We put the fire out. So, yeah, I find this victim blaming particularly pernicious. And what the government's been talking about these last few days is really disgusting, to be quite honest. They are telling people, you know, they're basically saying you are malingering if you have a mental health problem. You should be at work, and we're going to change the benefit system, and we are going to force you back to work, and we're going to bring in people who are not doctors, who are not medically qualified, who are going to tell you that you're not ill, even though you probably are, and make you go back to work. And you know, well, that's not going to work any more than the yoga mats and the you know, and the organic milkshakes. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
That's disgusting as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. One of you used the phrase perfect storm. I think there are other elements in this perfect storm. I mean, it's undoubtedly so that COVID and the lockdowns have played an important role in this. And of course, we don't quite know how big or what aspects of that period is now influencing the population's mental health. But even if you see the younger generations, we're talking burnout symptoms and amongst millennials, so 18 years old and older, already talking about burnout levels of more than 50% of people's complaining about being overwhelmed on a more or less daily basis. I mean, if we go down that route, it's horrendous, and clearly there must. It's never a single thing. There's never a single silver bullet when these big problems, I think, establish themselves. I don't necessarily think it's just the top-downness of our working environment. I don't think it's just COVID and the lockdowns. I don't think it's just the fact, point we haven't touched upon yet, I suppose, but the fact that perhaps talking about mental health has become more accepted. So perhaps that must have encouraged also people to share their problems and their symptoms more openly than perhaps was the case until about 10 years ago or so. So undoubtedly that will also have influenced the statistics on this. So I think anyone who comes with a single bullet type solution, I think, is kidding themselves and their audience that is going to work, right?
Can I have a go at challenging that, Paul?
Go on.
So yeah, I accept that there are bigger, you know, in the case of the shadow pandemic, you know, the mental health pandemic that we always knew was going to follow the viral pandemic. You know, there are those things going on. However, what remains true in my mind, and if I'm being honest, gives me hope as an eternal optimist, is that the opportunity that has always been there remains present. And I firmly believe that if we address the way that we lead, organise and manage our organisations, then for a significantly larger group of people, work will become something that is a net positive thing for their mental and emotional health, and not a net detractor from their mental and emotional and, let's face it, physical health, because they're all interconnected. So I think that there is no one silver bullet, and I'm not describing it as a silver bullet, but if we apply a completely different set of assumptions in how we lead, organise and manage, and get rid of the ones that we're still bagging us down, you know, we're still bogged down by, that are well over 100 years old now, then we have the opportunity for a tide to kind of lift all boats and And you know what? If people only learn when they are in a place of good self-esteem. You know, we know that, you know, our brain science, our neuroscience has moved on in recent decades. You know, we're only capable of doing, you know, deep work, accessing our higher executive levels of our brain, you know, when we are well rested and not stressed and not in fight and flight and all that stuff. So there's such a gain to be had in terms of performance too. But we're not going to do it by the 60 million quid to it, 60 billion pounds worth of sticking plasters. We're going to do it by going back and addressing the root causes of this. And aside from the sort of whole sort of reinventing, self-managing, progressive organization stuff, I don't see a glimmer of that going on anywhere at the moment. I mean, we're looking at 4 bits of research in this area at the moment that we've shared between us ahead of this call, or I've been looking at for other purposes. It isn't talked about at all. No one's talking about it at that level. Fundamentally, our organizations are designed to detract from people's well-being. Fundamentally, Posywid, you get what you know. Our organizations are perfectly designed to have the effect on people that they do, unless we fundamentally change that design. And I don't mean the shape and size of the org chart. We shouldn't expect things to change. And no one's talking about it.
No. I had a conversation just before this with Richard Merrick, who writes a Substack called Outside the Walls, and he's a bit older than me. We were talking about how in the past you would you might get to your mid-40s, whatever, and realize your career had plateaued and you weren't going to carry on going up the ladder. But there would always be a place for you in the organization where you could carry on working, would find it rewarding and fulfilling, and would support your lifestyle until you retired. And we don't have that anymore. And he used the word, he said, in performance cultures, which is a very interesting word. Basically what happens when you get to 40 or 50, they say, well, it's very expensive, we could probably get someone in cheaper to do that, and they push people out. And so we've had this harshening of the environment that people are in. And yet we still think, well, that's just the way it has to be because it's always been like that. But it's not. It's actually been degrading quite significantly over the past, 30 years, I would say, if not longer. And that's why we're seeing this, increase in mental health issues. And the whole thing, I mean, it can't carry on like this. I mean, I always characterize it as, people think of it, the organization as a machine, and now they're running it flat out. And it's going absolutely like the clappers and everything's about to fall apart. And the thing that's failing is the weakest link, and the weakest link are the people in it. And at some point, you either have to rebuild the whole system and go about it differently, or it's going to explode.
Yeah, and I suppose we see some of the symptoms. Some of the symptoms are what we are talking about today. It's increasing mental health issues. It's especially in the age group that you've just referred to, people basically clocking off and leaving the workplace altogether, or finding a much more flexible working and lifestyle combination that works for them. And according to the powers that be, stop contributing as much as they otherwise could have, whoever determines that, to society and to GDP. So yeah, I think you're right. I think we see some of those symptoms. The question is a little bit how long this spluttering engine will keep going on before it does shoot its pistons out and its all the bits and pieces.
I think possibly not much longer, but if you look at the Gen Z, who are much more focused on and aware of their mental health, and they look at this environment and they say, yeah, thanks, but no thanks, I'm not doing that. And if if the emerging generations are deciding to go down different routes, then there aren't going to be the people for organisations to carry on working the way they do. So it will force change, but yeah, maybe some of them might blow up first.
So do we know of any organizations who get this right, who are actually the outliers and who seem more enlightened and more successful simply in preventing these kinds of issues?
Well, I'm reminded there of the conversation that we had 3 or 4 conversations ago with Henry Stewart. You know, so 15 years ago or whenever it was, Henry kind of had a moment of realization and fundamentally changed what Happy's key objectives were. And the way he went about doing that was to address the way that he leads, organizes and manages through his team to be centered around humans and human happiness, and you know, in primacy, and everything else is secondary to that. And he shares a lovely graph of that being the point of inflection in terms of that organization's growth in terms of turnover and growth in terms of profitability, and essentially led by happier people too. So yeah, I think there are examples. I'd be very, very interested in your reflections on the burnout organization, Paul, and where you see their paradigm, their management philosophy fitting in this sort of continuum between toxic organizations and happy organizations, for the want of better labels. But if what I stated earlier about control being at the real nub of this, then you're not overly extending yourself by saying, you know, higher trust, higher autonomy, lower bureaucracy organizations will have the happy consequence of happier people and better mental health, right? So yeah, I think there are some examples, but they're a tiny fraction, aren't they? You know, progressive organizations, probably less than 0.5% of organizations in this country and globally.
Before you answer about burnout, it's interesting that the question, because your response, Ben, talking about happy, said, you know, that's when the profit went up, and they, you know, and you responded with the conventional measures, because we've never measured happiness of employees. So it's an impossible question to answer, because it's not a metric that's used, and that's perhaps the start of the problem. Is we don't measure this. It's not factored in.
Oh, goodness me.
It's not, you know, and I accept that there's lots of reasons why it's quite hard to measure, but it's just not even been attempted.
I would need to refer back to Henry, but I think they've tried quite hard to develop a proxy for happiness, and that is their leading metric. So I think that they are, but I absolutely agree with you. It's very, very rarely done, and the next closest thing is probably employee experience or employee engagement.
We all know where that is.
Yeah, exactly. And the mechanisms that are used to give us a handle on that are just so woefully bad, that all the data that emerges from those, all the usual suspects, is pretty erroneous anyway. It's not helpful. So we're asking the wrong questions in the wrong way. But yeah, or the point I was trying to make was, if we put people at the front if we put human psychology, sociology, even anthropology, and we work with the grain of human beings rather than against it, then good things happen. And we maybe don't need so much focus or primacy on, you know, profit and turnover, for instance, because they are consequential and they will follow. That's the message from Henry, basically. Put this first and the rest will follow. And his data does kind of prove that point, which is quite nice.
Yeah, and I think that's a theme that you see across progressive organizations in general, that they don't put the spotlight on profit, but it emerges almost automatically as a result of allowing people to do what's right with a clear vision of what that right thing then happens to be. And I don't want to put down the achievements of Henry and his team. My argument, and the argument I get often myself when I share these kinds of stories, is of course, well, these are relatively small organizations. You know, Dunbar's number, if you still, you know, 150, if you is a number of people that you can still know everybody by name and face, and it becomes, and that allows for personal connections, and personal connections are important in engagement and connectedness and ultimately therefore also performance. But how about those much more anonymous, massive organizations, you know, thousands of employees? Where do we find the ones that buck the trend in terms of mental health issues and the always on, the top down pressure, the things like that? And that's why I'm still keen to find the solutions and the examples. I mean, yes, burnout sits there some, you know, in the foothills of that sort of size and scale, with about, you know, depending on how you count them, 10 to 15,000 employees, and they definitely share these characteristics of connectedness and relatively low levels of mental health issues and absences. There are some issues there. Workload, lack of staff is an issue there, and people are so committed that sometimes the work themselves still into problems. So it's not a 100% watertight guarantee to a trouble-free working life. And also that the profits, or certainly the business results, it's a not-for-profit organization, but the business results have certainly followed that sort of philosophy and structure. But I'm still indeed, keen to find, I don't know, the BT equivalents, or the Virgins, or the NatWests, or whatever the organizations may be, but that kind of scale where things are done differently, or where you can really see that that for any large-scale organization, the solution is clear to see. And that, I think, we're still working towards collectively, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know nearly enough about them, but the HEA is an organization that is of that scale, you know, 80,000 people, something like that. But just in the same way as W.L. Gore, their way of dealing with having tens of thousands of employees is to, you know, fragment those teams and give away autonomy to very, very certainly group sizes of people that are below the Dunbar number.
Yeah.
So actually, HEA and W.L. Gore are both in the tens of thousands, but actually they've specifically designed their organization not to feel like an organization with tens of thousands of people.
But many of the things we advocate, you know, from a progressive point of view, actually help improve mental health. So I don't think it has to be one of those sort of like kumbaya movements, you know, that undoubtedly, I mean, I can't remember, one of the organizations in Lalou's book is a they come together every quarter for a day to do spiritual stuff. It's very spiritually based, but it doesn't have to be.
No,
because it's just about bringing in practices and approaches that make it a more human place to work and give people more control over their environment. So things, I mean, we saw with COVID, although that's caused a lot of mental health, it actually eased the mental health problem for a lot of people because hybrid working gave them more space and time to engage other parts of their life. They had more autonomy, so they felt more in control, which made them, have a better mental attitude. And it undoubtedly moved control away from the centre back towards the individuals. So more of that, please. Self-organising on a greater scale, and giving people that autonomy would definitely help mental health. I think moving to more asynchronous work practices where you're not expected to be on call and you're not expected to respond immediately. You're expected to think and reflect and give a considered response. Completely changes that tone because you're not in that fight or flight mode all the time, which we know is, that's what causes the chronic stress. Means you have constantly elevated levels of cortisol in your body, which is really bad for you physically and mentally. And also having, free and open access to information, encouraging people to experiment and learn that way rather than having to follow some prescribed process. I think all of these things create an environment that is much more conducive to good mental health, gives people the scope to express themselves and explore their own potential, and find their own challenges, as you mentioned earlier, Ben, which is all going to be good, and make them feel that their work is important and they have control over that and their lives, and they can determine where it fits in their lives. So that's where I think organisations should be going.
So I think, Colin, that's, you've answered the question that I had in my head, which was, what recommendations would we give to a CEO of a decent sized organisation where to spend their energy and perhaps even a little bit of that £60 billion. It sounds to me that some of the solutions or avenues to explore for those organizations are significantly cheaper than some of the things that currently money is being spent on. So as preventative routes, it sounds like pretty good value for money to me. Ben, what advice would you give to such a CEO?
Yeah, I'm going to be in danger of repeating some of the stuff I mentioned earlier. So look at this at a fundamental and holistic level. Look at what you can change, preferably through experimentation involving your people in the fundamentally around how you lead, organize, and manage, and how jobs are designed, etc., etc. And do that with the intent of engendering, connection and belonging between people, putting the locus of control close to the work, not separated from it, allowing people to play for their strengths, which one of Henry's favorites, connecting people to the impact of their job, giving visibility of that, which of course function and specialism are designed specifically to erode or diminish that. Don't saddle people with meaningless bureaucracy. People don't mind working hard if they know it's making a difference in line with the purpose. But if they're working hard just to feed the beast, the corporate mothership, then that's not going to have a good effect. Trust people. We've talked about it. A healthy balance of challenge and support. We do need challenge in order for our work to be rewarding. But that doesn't mean to say we set people ridiculous targets, walk away, abdicate our responsibility, and then come back and give them a good whipping if those haven't been met. And generally just a shift in the style of management, from being that kind of super checker-upper and highly directive to being that coach, that champion, that advocate whose primary job is to do all that they can to enable people to be as successful as they are able, given their innate human potential, individually and collectively. And I think if you do those things, performance will go up and the health symptoms will diminish. Sorry, long answer, but it's something I care about.
I think you've given the average CEO that we had in mind quite a to-do list. So let's put a quick stop to this conversation then, so that you all out there can crack on. Plenty of good advice here, I hope. But if you need further, then do drop us a line. We hope you enjoyed this episode. And of course, we look forward to seeing you or having you listening in on us on the future episode of Work Punks. See you then. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.